Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot-Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. And in this podcast, Josh and I are going to go over 9 players that I think are obvious buys in the Dynasty market right now. Let's get it. All right, we are back. We did our Dynasty sells. We are now back with Dynasty buys. Long time no see. Hutch, how are you doing tonight?
Hell yeah. I think, this is number two, the podcast number two of the night. I feel like I've properly shaken off the rust, hopefully. So let's go for round two. Let's do it, man.
All right, let's jump right in. Jesper Bratt is the first player that we're talking about here tonight. Last year popped for 27 goals, 83 points. Kind of seemed like nobody noticed. Like nobody was talking about Jesper Bratt at any point throughout the season. It felt like. As with the sells, I am going to run through some positives and negatives for each player. If there are negatives with Jesper Bratt, I can't even say the man's name. 12.8% on ice shooting percentage feels like a bit of an outlier. He had a 10.8% each of the prior 2 years. And, we've got the new coach effect here. So obviously, coach coming in throughout the season last year might not totally implement a totally new system in New Jersey right away. Maybe next year things change even a little bit more. There is some variance there, but overall, I'm just super bullish on Jesper Bratt. Before we delve into the numbers too hard here, Josh, give me your overall take on the player. Do you think that we've seen the peak from Bratt already, or do we think that there's more of this to come?
No, I think this guy's on the rise. I think part of that is New Jersey as a team is on the rise. You've got Jack Hughes, who Bratt has essentially been stapled to. That is only going to get better. He's a guy that was scoring at just a ridiculous pace at the start of the year, got hurt, and I don't think ever really got back to 100% after that injury. He still obviously scored at a really, really nice point pace. But I think Jesper Bratt is I'm very excited about this guy. I think, and I think he's a guy that you may be able to get in drafts for pretty decent value. I just have this feeling, like you said, I don't think people are talking enough about him. So that is typically a guy that I have my eye out for when the ADP start coming out, and just to see if I can. He's a guy that I can maybe target a little bit lower than I value him. So I'm very excited about Bratt.
Yeah, so to dig in a little bit more, he was up to 1917 average time on ice this season. That's up a big amount from his previous 2 years, 1725 and 1722. So basically 2 minutes a night up this year, and 1937 the last 20 games. So if you're wondering how the new coach deployed Bratt, it was a lot more. Basically, he was very clearly relied on to a new level this year and completely responded. And I mean, everybody was all up in arms all off season about the Devils' top 6 and how loaded they were, and Bratt still got that kind of deployment. So that really does kind of speak volumes to me about how he's viewed by everyone there in New Jersey. He had a 63% IPP this year. He had 78% and 67% the 2 years prior to this. So that feels like it's on the low end of what we could expect from Bratt. 10.9% shooting percentage and 13.2% and 15.1% the 2 years prior to that. So again, feels like the shooting percentage was kind of low. Posted career high in shots per 60, individual scoring chances for per 60. Really, his entire career, if you go all the way back to his rookie year, it just looks like a upward graph taking off in terms of like the shots per 60, individual scoring chances for per 60, all the numbers we like to look at here. Bratt really looks like on an individual level, he's just been continually improving year after year after year. Last two seasons, he's also set kind of like a new plateau, I would say, in terms of his on ice numbers. Corsi 4 per 60, he's been at 80.7 and 78.5. The scoring chances 4 per 60, 45 and 41.4. He's only turning 26 this summer. Again, I feel like this is a guy nobody's talking about. I am really going out there trying to acquire Jesper Bratt in a lot of spots. We talked about selling off a guy like Sam Reinhart. Could you sell Sam Reinhart for Jesper Bratt plus get a whole bunch on top? I kind of feel like you could. And you're getting a little bit younger with Bratt, plus you're probably getting pretty close to the same production in my mind moving forward. Also tied to an elite player, the way Reinhart is tied to Barkov, you have Bratt tied to Jack Hughes. I think none of that goes away. I think the Devils are a team on the rise overall, despite the kind of poor result this past season. So I am all aboard the Jesper Bratt train. He's one of my biggest hype trains for this offseason, I think.
Worth noting as well, if you have any concerns with the new coach about ice time, Sheldon Keefe has proven in Toronto that he loves playing his big boys big minutes.
Yeah,
Jesper Bratt is 100% one of those guys. I think I have no concerns about ice time there. So yeah, again, very very pumped about this guy.
for sure. All right, let's move it right along. Let's talk about Cole Caufield. This guy scored 28 goals, 65 points, yet it does feel to me like, just being in the fantasy hockey community, it feels like public perception of his ability seems to have decreased. Feels like a few years ago, everybody was like, he's one of the top two prospects coming into the league. Like, he's going to be an absolute 50-goal sniper every single year. Like, there were really high reviews on Caufield's game. And it feels like, especially after this season, that all of that kind of hype has really died down. I mean, there is some reason for that, right? It's still Montreal. It's Nick Suzuki as the number one center there. He's not going to truly elevate Caufield. I think maybe I've undersold Nick Suzuki at times. I can admit that, his abilities at times. But I still stand by the fact that he's not a true number one center in the league in terms of like an elite level superstar who's going to elevate Caufield to another level. We really do need Yuri Slafkovsky to continue to improve on his second half, to build on that, and to continue his emergence to get Caufield to a real ceiling case in my mind. What's your overall take on Caufield? Do you think that 28 goals, 65 points, does that feel right for you for next season? Do you think you'll be projecting more? If so, I think he would probably be a buy at this stage.
Yeah, I'd 100% be projecting more. This is a guy that I think will be a 40 goal scorer, probably pretty consistently in this league. He's a guy that I see sticking at the top of the lineup in Montreal, even if Nick Suzuki gets moved down for someone else, whether it's a guy coming up through the ranks or someone that they acquire. Montreal's a team that I wonder maybe a little bit more of a player in this offseason in terms of trades and free agency. Just I feel like they're kind of getting to a stage where they have promoted a lot of younger players, and I feel like they just need to take another step in terms of the development as a team. So I could see them acquiring someone that could take over for Nick Suzuki, but obviously not a guarantee. But I think even with Suzuki as his center, this is a guy that could still score 40 goals. Like his percentages. I mean, his shooting percentage this year. What was it? It was
8.9%.
8.9%. Yeah,
Yeah.
which and he was 12.2% the year before and 16.5 the year before that. I see him more somewhere in between 12 and 16%. He's just got too good of a shot, and we've seen him showcase it at times. Yeah, it just seemed like he wasn't feeling it for a lot of the year this year, and went through long cold stretches where he was still firing the puck. But yeah, anyways, this is a guy that I could see in redraft leagues. You're still going to get him for really good value, and I think he may actually be a really nice return on investment this year.
Would you say that he went through some coal stretches this year, Josh?
Oh boy, uh,
That's as
I
good
don't
as
know.
it gets.
That was tough, man.
Thanks for the honest review. I appreciate that. That's what you need friends for in your life, right? All right. But yeah, I will say, like, the shooting percentage I do think is probably in the 13-ish% range. I'll have to really dig in on projections to figure out where I'm going to land on that, but probably 13, maybe even a little higher percent range. Definitely 8.9%. well on the low side. And yeah, the ice time went up this year, 1925 average time on ice, 1802 the year before. So definitely on the come up there. The IPP was a little bit low this past year, so that could improve. Set career highs and wide margins in both Corsi 4 per 60 and scoring chances 4 per 60, so that feels good. Just a monster shot and chance generator, has always been at every opportunity throughout his young career so far. 11.8 shots per 60 this past season. Just basically an elite number overall. So I think that Cole Caufield can definitely be one of those guys to take another step next year. I do think 40 goals is well within his range of outcomes. He probably needs a little bit more help and support to get that. Maybe Slavkovsky is the guy who can help to get him there. And if Mike Matheson continues what he's been doing on the back end, maybe they can really, establish a really nice power play, get that part of his game going a little bit more again. There's definitely scenarios where Cole Caufield runs up for 40 goals this year, and you missed one of the best buying windows you could ever have on this really exciting young player. All right, next up, speaking of exciting young players, Dylan Guenther took a step last year, posted 18 goals and 35 points in 45 games played. That's a 33 goal, 64 point pace. I really don't think a lot of people are taking note of that. That's a really, really nice pace for what amounts to a rookie season for Dylan Guenther. Negatives, I mean, we still don't have much of a sample size. He played 33 games his actual rookie season. I don't know if you can truly call that a rookie season. Barely crossed the 25 game margin where he is no longer considered a rookie. Then 45 last year, so we still don't even have like 82 games of sample on Dylan Guenther. You know, last year, these are his luck metrics: 67% IPP, 14.9% shooting percentage, 12.1% on ice shooting percentage. So is he efficient, or did he just run pretty hot in terms of the shooting percentage, on ice shooting percentage? I think we just don't have enough data basically right now to really say what Dylan Guenther is in terms of the efficiencies. And, who knows? Like, this team's going to Utah next year. Is that a net positive change? It could be like a complete disaster. Who really knows what that's going to look like, what effect that could have on the players, on the coaching, on everything there. I think that's just a major unknown that could be just seen as positive, just because everybody's not expecting much. Maybe variance is a good thing when you're not expecting much, because you could get a really high end outcome as well. What's your take on Guenther overall? Do you see positives here? Are you interested in acquiring him in your leagues?
I'm very interested in Dylan Guenther. This was a guy that when he got called up, I watched him really closely his first few games just because of how highly touted he was, or how highly touted he is, and his production was great, and underlying numbers looked great. He's a guy that I talked about quite a bit on Rolling Lines as someone that I didn't think people were paying very close attention to. He had got really good opportunity. He played on a kid line with Logan Cooley, which not 5v5 wasn't super productive, but he was kind of driving that line, and then played consistent power play 1 minutes, which was huge for him. I loved when it was him and not Alex Kerfoot as the fourth forward on
Yeah.
that power play. It made so much more sense. But I think that Dylan Guenther has a good spot in this lineup moving forward. Now, Utah, it's interesting. It seems like they're keeping the management group and the coaching staff going forward. I mean, I haven't heard any different. But all that I've heard in terms of the direction going forward is they have the green light to make big moves, and they're going to be a big player this offseason. So I don't know whether or not that means Guenther gets pushed down the lineup because they acquire more premium players, or he gets a better opportunity with guys that with guys that are maybe a little more skilled than who was playing with 5v5 last year. But I don't know. I don't know that his spot in the lineup is necessarily solidified, but if they do think very highly of him, which is I mean, it's promising. So I mean, all in all, I'm rambling now, but Dylan Guenther is someone that I'm definitely interested in going forward.
Yeah, I would say that this is a guy who, I mean, he came in this year, really established himself Averaged 1703 over the last 20 games, so definitely like an upward trend on his average time on ice throughout the course of his 45 games in the NHL this year. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that he could become an 18 or even 19 plus minute player on a team that is currently at least weak on the wings. As you mentioned, still to see what they do this offseason. You could have Logan Cooley take a step. He was
Yeah.
basically an untried rookie this year. He could take that next step as many expected him to be a star from the minute he touched the ice. Didn't work out that way, but maybe this year he really does take that step, and maybe that really raises the 5v5 scoring for Dylan Guenther to another level. As it was, like his all strengths numbers are terrific: 9.9 shots per 60, 10.1 individual scoring chances for per 60. One of the very few players on this roster that has the ability to generate those kinds of chances. Over the last 20 games here, 11.4 shots per 60 he got up to. So continued to elevate his game as the season progressed. He actually led the team in on ice Corsi 4 per 60 and second only to Barrett Hayton, which is an interesting tidbit there in on ice scoring chances 4 per 60. You could say that, he got a bunch of power play time towards the end of the season. That's a big percentage of his overall time because he wasn't playing as much 5v5, but the point still stands. He definitely was a net positive for this team whenever he was on the ice. He's 21 years old. Like, it's not like this is a kid who's, been toiling in the AHL and just had a lucky 45 game sample here. It's definitely a player that people have been excited about for a while since his draft year, and now really seems like he's just starting to come into his own. I'm hesitant to make this call and make it public, but I was super into Wyatt Johnston after last year based on his underlying numbers. That has obviously come true in a big way this year, and I think everybody views Wyatt Johnston in a much different light this year than they did last year. If there is a Wyatt Johnston breakout in 2024-25, my betting leader for that would be Dylan Guenther. So take that for what it's worth, but Dylan Guenther is the guy I would attach Wyatt Johnston's name to as similar in terms of the profile that we were getting excited about this time last year. Let's keep moving on. Let's talk about one of the biggest disappointments of last year for many people, including myself, Tage Thompson. Yeah, 29 goals, 56 points in 71 games. He's drafted in the early second round on average in most leagues. It does feel like he just hasn't quite taken that next step to be a true 1C, playing 20 plus minutes a night, all situations. He's not been that guy. Looking back now with the hindsight we have now, it does start to feel like the 2022-23 season where he had that monster year. Does start to feel a little bit more like an outlier team wide. Skinner regressed, Dahlin regressed, Cousins regressed. It wasn't just Tage Thompson, although he was probably the most notable just given his draft position. A lot of these players on Buffalo did regress last year, so it starts to feel like the team was just on a heater generally, and that kind of rising tide lifted all boats there. He did dip down to 9.4 individual scoring chances for per 60 after he peaked at 12.4 in 2022-23. He was at 9.6 the season before that. So again, it starts to feel like that 22-23 season was a bit of an outlier. What do you make of all this? Where do you stand in your assessment of Tage Thompson's just general talent level? What do you view his ceiling at? Do you think this is a player that has 50 goal ceiling, has 100 point ceiling? Do you still view him in that light, or is that taking a step back after this past year?
He's Tage Thompson done. No, I'm kidding. I love Tage Thompson. I think this is a guy, again, in redrafts. I know we're talking dynasties, but a guy that I'm looking at for his draft stock to drop, and for you to potentially have like a huge return on investment for where you're getting Tage Thompson. Like I don't see it dropping a ton. Maybe like third round is probably the wheelhouse for Tage Thompson. But yeah, I mean, this guy, I think, I think does have 50 goal potential. But yeah, like you said, everyone regressed on this team. So I imagine that everyone's happy medium is somewhere in the middle between where they were the previous year, where they all ran a little bit hot, and but I think everyone's a little bit better than they were last year too. Alex Tuck regressed, Jeff Skinner regressed, Dylan Cousins regressed.
Yeah.
And really, they didn't have a consistent power play unit. They kind of move things all over the place. Hard to find consistency there. Their power play was one of their best assets the previous year. I would argue that the power play ran pretty hot in terms of their shooting percentage and what they were actually generating. So I think that kind of came back down to reality a little bit. But
Mhm.
I think across the board, there's definitely some positive regression coming here for Tage. His underlings are still awesome. They're not quite where they were the year before. But I mean, at times it seemed like maybe there was an injury involved there too. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bit of speculation, but I think a nice fresh Tage Thompson going into a new year, potentially with I don't know, with some younger, with a little bit more youth injected into the lineup for Buffalo. Um, I'm excited about Tage Thompson, and that's a guy that I have been trying to acquire in dynasty leagues because yeah, I mean I don't see his stock getting any lower than a 56 point pace.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good point. On the injury front, like it was confirmed there was something going on that he was playing through. Obviously, it's up for conjecture how much that really affected him and how much was poor play and how much was the injury. But um, the if you want to believe in that narrative, you can kind of paint yourself that picture because over the last 19 games that he played, he posted 11 goals, 21 points. So he was kind of all the way back. It felt like on the last part of the season there. So, I mean, he led the team in goals, points, shots over those games. If you want to believe in that narrative, it's definitely out there and it's definitely in front of you for you to latch onto. So there is that, despite the lack of overall production, he still ranked 12th in the league in shots per 60. Like he's still pumping shots on goal. We saw this a little bit with Austin Matthews, right? With not this past season, but the season before, he had some wrist injuries that were well publicized because Toronto. And that year he shot like, what was it, 12.2% or something, and then comes back this year and obviously has a magical 69 goal season, which was pretty nice for us Toronto fans. But overall, I think that you can definitely paint yourself that picture with Tage Thompson, right? There's a lot of things that do lend itself to this theory. 11.8% shooting percentage after 15.0 and 15.9% the previous two seasons. You've got the 10.1% on ice shooting percentage. It was 12.0 and 13.1 the previous two seasons. You got Lindy Ruff coming to town. He played the hell out of Jack Hughes. Could he view Tage similarly? 20 plus minutes a night. Tage is that potential 50 goal guy, 90, 100 point guy if things break right. I think the point that I really want to make with Tage, and I'll continue to make it all off season and leading into redraft season as well, is that the upside with Tage is just so far beyond what you can get with any of the other players that I think will be valued similarly, that I would trade any of them plus to acquire Tage. And because if he does hit on that ceiling and get that 20 plus minutes a night, that true ceiling is like league winning, quite honestly. And that's something I just think you can't say about a lot of the other players that would be potentially valued similarly in your dynasty leagues. All right, next up we got Jared McCann. He had 29 goals, 62 points in 80 games. This was viewed as a regression for sure. I mean, he scored 40 goals and 70 points in 79 games the year prior, so definitely in terms of overall production, it was a step backwards. On the negative side, even with this step back, he still had a 78% IPP. That's versus 69% IPP the prior season, which is a lot nicer. Never proven himself really as a minute earner. He's averaged a career high 1645 last year, which is definitely nowhere near the kind of level that we're usually talking about with guys who score 70 plus points on the regular. That 2022-23 season, similar to Tage, does start to look like an outlier. Yet a 19% shooting percentage and a 13.4% on ice shooting percentage. There are some positives that I want to get into, but give me your temperature on Jared McCann. Do you think he falls somewhere in between here? And what do you make of Dan Bylsma coming to town in Seattle and how that could change things here?
I think that's the biggest story here, and the biggest reason why you should be be buying Seattle Kraken, at least the guys at the very top of the lineup, because Jared McCann more than any of the others, but I think there are a couple other names that I think are worth buying on. They got Dave Haxtell the hell out of there.
Yeah,
And
finally.
that's what we've been begging for a while now, basically since he got there. So
Yeah.
Jared McCann, I think next year I could see him getting a career high in ice time, which wouldn't be much. Like you said, his career high is 1645 this past year. I mean, yeah, I think reaching his full potential. I think this is a guy that is a high efficiency shooter. He's proven that in the past. He has a great shot. If they load up the top power play and play them consistently, that would, I mean, the other thing about Seattle is they don't have a ton of top end talent. So can you load up a power play? That's the other question. But I still think Jared McCann. I mean, I haven't done a lot of research on Dan Bylsma. It's been a while since he's been in the league, so I'd have to kind of look back at his coaching style and how he plays his top players. Obviously, he had Crosby and Malkin, so I imagine his time in Pittsburgh, he was probably playing them quite a bit. But I'd have to look at his time in Buffalo and kind of see what the trends are there. But I mean, it can only get better than with Dave Haxtell. So
Yeah.
my opinion is this is probably an outlier for McCann, and there's some positive regression coming and some more minutes. So that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think if there is one player in Seattle that benefits the most from Bylsma coming to town, it feels like it has to be McCann. I do think that it's a valid point to make that, does Oliver Bjorkstrand also get on that power
Yeah,
play unit? He
that's the
and
other guy I was thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he and McCann were on the same power play unit for much of last year, so that could make some sense that they would stick together on a new top power play unit. Does Matty Beniers get even more ice time as a guy that Seattle is hoping to mold into their top center there? I mean, I'll leave the light on for Shane Wright to potentially come in, and he had a pretty impressive little run there.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like maybe we, as a fantasy hockey community, might have given up on Shane Wright just a little bit too soon, and he could have some run as well. So there's definitely some interesting players around Seattle that could get a big bump with Bylsma coming to town, and I think that's what you want to really be buying in on. For McCann, particularly, like despite the some of the downsides that I mentioned before, he did post career highs in Corsi 4 per 60 and scoring chances 4 per 60. So it's not like he's washed up and downturning in that regard. He feels like he's definitely just a guy who's going to be always an above average player in terms of efficiency. In his 3 seasons in Seattle, 81%, 69%, and 78% IPP, 13.6%, 19%, 13.4% in shooting percentage. So you feel like even if it's not like incredible, you do feel like he's going to be probably in the 70s in IPP and probably around 14% in terms of the shooting percentage. So definitely an above average efficiency guy, even if he doesn't get like incredible minutes. But if he does get, 19 plus minutes a night, give him 3 minutes, 30 seconds on the power play all year long, I think we could be pretty excited. We could see him challenge those 40 goal plus numbers that he posted 2 years ago. All right, next up, we're going to the defenseman now. We got Brandon Montour here. Huge fall from grace, really, last year, netting just 8 goals, 33 points in 66 games for a 41-point pace after scoring 73 points in 80 games the year prior. He did have a little bit of a drop off in the average time on ice, 24:07 in 2022-23, down to 23:26 this past year. Again, you've got a contract situation. So let's start there, Josh. Tell me your temperature on Montour returning. We talked about Reinhart in the last episode. We think he'll resign. What's the temperature on Montour, especially if the expectation is that they sign Reinhart? Can they get Montour signed as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't heard a ton on Montour. It sounds like he may be testing the market, and I think he'd be right to do that. I think he'd have to take a discount going to Florida, especially if they're bringing back Reinhardt, because there's really not a ton of cap left there in Florida. I think I think no matter where he goes, he needs to be in a situation where he's getting power play one in order to be productive for your team. And I think he's proven that he can do that. So I think it's an interesting prospect to see him move off of out of Florida. It almost might be to his benefit because, like you said, Florida kind of, I think you said it in the last episode when we were talking about Sam Reinhart. Florida's kind of moved their power play around a little bit, and he's kind of been deprioritized.
Yeah.
So it may be in his best interest to go somewhere else where he kind of can play the way that he did the previous year in Florida, where he was getting a ton of touches, a ton of shots on goal. And yeah, I mean, his underlying numbers still looked very good, on ice numbers as well, this past year. So I could see him having a bounce back, maybe getting signed for less money than he would have the year prior, and potentially getting a nice opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to find a home for Montour that actually makes some sense. Like, is there somewhere out there where he can actually go and be like
Yeah.
on a top power play that's exciting? Like, even if he isn't the top option on the Panthers power play, like it's still a good place to be for a defenseman,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's not like it's
Yeah.
a bad situation. Yeah, I was just trying to scan through like most of these situations, they've already got their power play quarterback, right? Some of the top power plays last year, obviously the Oilers, the Leafs, I don't think are going to be in the market for a defenseman of this caliber unless they do make that massive trade
Unfortunately.
everybody in Toronto's
Yeah.
talking about. The Stars have no interest. The Rangers have no interest. These are the top scoring chance. I'm just literally sorted by scoring chances for per 60 on Natural Stat Trick. Minnesota Wild had the most scoring chances for per 60 on the power play last year. And that would be a really interesting one, but they're completely handcuffed with the
Yeah,
Parise
they
contract.
can't do it.
Parise and Suter, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think they could make that move. That would be very
That
interesting
would
to
be the
me.
perfect spot for him.
Yeah, that would
Absolutely
probably
perfect.
be the one, but I really don't see that coming. Yeah, it's really going to come down to where he could actually ostensibly go, and I just don't think there's all that many spots out there that I'm actually getting super excited about. And like there are some real bad scenarios if you really stop to think about it. Like what if San Jose decides to use some of their cap space, just throw it on the blue line just to hit the cap floor and to keep things going in the rebuild. Montour's like, I'll just take some money and I'll go live on the beach in Cali, goes from Florida to California, does that, right? Like I mean, it's probably like what, sub 1% outcome, but the fact that it's still a possibility at this point has to give you a little bit of pause in going to acquire Brandon Montour. And I mean, the guy is 30, right? So he's not the youngest guy here either. Take that into account as you will. Yeah, I just think there are some scenarios there that do give you some pause, even if he does get some big money this offseason. The positive thing is like wherever he goes, he's going to be a top pair power play one defenseman. Like that's what a team is acquiring if they're acquiring Brandon Montour. So this past season, what's the excuse for the lack of production? Similar to Tage Thompson, you do have an injury excuse kind of built in here. He came back from pretty significant offseason shoulder surgery. And yeah, it seemed like he never quite got untracked. The 2022-23 season, it really does feel like, even looking at it now with the benefit of a hindsight of another season afterwards, it does really feel like it was largely supported by the underlying data. In my mind, massive shots per 60 on ice numbers, no extreme like efficiencies that were out of whack. So that part doesn't really scare me that much in terms of that 73-point season just being a complete outlier. Like he could never even score 60 points again in the league. Like that's not within the range of outcomes for me with Brandon Montour. The 35% IPP this last year was his worst since he played 54 games for Buffalo in 2019-20. His other two seasons in Florida, he's at 43 and 48%, so definitely should be at least in that range. The 4.8% shooting percentage, lowest number since his Anaheim days. In Florida, he's been at 7.2% and 6.6%. The shots per 60 did drop this past year, but the individual scoring chances for per 60 remained up at 4.8. It was at 4.9 the year before, and that's seventh amongst all defensemen to play at least 500 minutes last year. So he's definitely still among the upper elite in terms of individual scoring chance generation from the back end, which obviously leads to some goal production for us more often than not. So I do think there are a lot of really interesting positives with Brandon Montour. I think this might be the time to buy before the spot is set and people know where he's going. If he does happen to land in like a home run situation, If he did go to the Leafs or he did go to the Wild somehow, cap gets moved around, like his value would go up again. But yeah, maybe you do want to wait and see and bet on him going to a spot where people are less excited about him again, and you can get him for even cheaper. That's for you to decide. But overall, I'm just in on Montour, the player, and I do think that he's going to provide us a bunch of really good seasons yet to come. Next up, we got Jakob Chychrun. He had a really mess season, I guess I would say, in Ottawa. He had 14 goals, which was really nice, but only 41 points in 82 games. Got very few looks on the top power play unit, so never really had a chance to pop off there. And for next year, like, what are we looking at? Could be behind Shabbat and Sanderson in the pecking order again for both even strength and power play time on ice. Realistically, there's still conversations about trading going around with Chychrun. I just don't think that's coming from within Ottawa in my mind. I think that's really media generated. I've never seen anything out of Ottawa that made it seem like that was even a remote possibility. The new coach coming there, Travis Green coming there, could be a positive or a negative. So we got some variance on that side. Downside is even less, even strength ice time, but the upside, he could be power play one. So you have that kind of possibility at least. What's your view there? Talk to me about how you view the pecking order, especially with Shabbat, Sanderson, and Chychrun going into next year.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really considered that much about the fact that there is a new coach coming in. So maybe he becomes the preferred option. I mean, I think he's the obvious option. I did all year last year. That's why I went all in on Jakob Chychrun in draft season. And it didn't quite work out. He still was pretty productive. I was still happy to have him on my team in terms of for a defenseman. And honestly, at the draft capital that I used to get on him, like you're picking him around pick 100.
Right.
It still wasn't that bad for a defenseman, but he was a guy that I expected to way outperform that draft capital. So I think, yeah, I mean, I you gotta hope he gets traded. I think
Mm-hmm.
I don't like I don't like the depth chart there, and I don't like that he's just never been appreciated for what he actually does on the ice. And I just don't think that he's utilized properly. So hopefully Travis Green uses him. But yeah, I think I still would be trying to buy him. I don't think that I don't think that the production gets any worse than this, and the opportunity gets any worse than it is right now, whether it's with a new team or with Travis Green. So
Yeah, I think that's fair as far as this season goes. I do think like you're looking at a guy who, even if this season goes much the same or even worse, you're looking at a guy who's going to hit the UFA market at the age of 27 after next season, and somebody's going to step up and make this guy a true number one for, yeah, 7 years basically. So I do think that in the long term is still the most probable outcome for Jakob Chychrun. It does seem like he is underutilized in Ottawa, or has been to this point at the least. So I think I would rather be in a year or two early and then a year too late, and maybe he does have that pop off season this year, but I'd rather acquire him now and yeah, just bet on the player talent that's pretty evidently there in my mind. I mean, this is a guy like without power play one, keep in mind, third in individual scoring chances for per 60 behind only Roman Yossi and Kale McCarr. Like, that's just incredible stuff. This guy, it's not like he was playing not a lot of minutes either, like a lot of 5v5 minutes,
yeah,
22, 23 this past year, getting a ton of minutes and still posting that kind of extreme level of individual scoring chance for numbers. That really speaks volumes to me, and it speaks volumes to me that he can keep up this kind of like 14 goal kind of output, even if he's not getting true elite deployment in terms of the power play. Seventh in shots per 60. The luck metrics look stable. Overall, posted the highest Corsi 4 of his career, best full season scoring chances for per 60 as well. I kind of relate this back to Tage Thompson a little bit in that the upside here is just monstrous. The price to acquire is probably not too bad. So, like, I'll acquire him if he really never takes that step, really never gets that deployment, then I'll probably just kind of get what I paid for. But if that ever does happen, then you could be looking at a guy who, again, is in that league winner category as a guy who, in the right situation, could go for like a 60 plus point season with 20 goals and be a difference maker at the defense position for you. All right, we're moving right along. Jeff Skinner here is going to make the list. This is going to be a little bit of a controversial one with some people, I'm sure. It was a 24 goal, 46 point season coming on the heels of a monstrous 35 goal, 82 point season the year before. We talked about a lot of this with Tage already, but Jeff Skinner, the one thing that's kind of unique to him is he has really proven himself to be inconsistent year to year in terms of the production. Consistently, it really does feel like fails to ingratiate himself with his coaches. He was bumped from the top power play for Cousins, for Middlestat, for Paterka, for Bowen Byram at times last year. Dropped down the lineup, dropped all the way into the bottom six. His average time on ice dropped from 17:23 to 15:59. He's 32 years old, so why the hell would anyone want to buy Jeff Skinner, Josh?
Yeah, again, we've got a new coach situation.
Yeah.
That's big. I don't think that Don Granato did a very good job last year. We'll just put it that way. I think that we talked about how all the players in Buffalo saw quite like a huge dip in production overall compared to the year prior. And Jeff Skinner, I mean, when we talked about volatile lineups, volatile power play combinations, Jeff Skinner got the shortest end of the stick out of any of these top guys, and really got pushed down. He was the odd man out consistently. So I don't see that continuing. I think he's too strong of a player, and he's not going anywhere. Like, let's be honest. He's making $9 million a year, I think, for 3 more seasons. So that's not a guy that's movable. I think the best course of action for the Sabres is to put him in a position to succeed, and that's playing him high in the lineup and playing him on the power play. So I see that happening next year. So I mean, the stock doesn't get much lower than it is right now. I think it's comparable to when you had who was it? Ralph Kruger playing him on the fourth line. Back when he was first in Buffalo. It's not quite that low, but it's comparable. So I would definitely be buying Jeff Skinner unless you're in a cap league.
Yeah. Yeah, and a cap league obviously is a pretty different situation, but you could probably get some pretty good retention on Jeff Skinner just to take him off somebody's hands. Either way, I still see some positives here with Jeff Skinner, quite honestly, and that's why I do have him as a buy. I think the public opinion on Jeff Skinner, now that he's had like a second downturn, is just going to be like, this guy's worthless, get him off my team. I can't believe I was into this guy and he fooled me with an 82-point season. I don't think it was foolery or anything. He had a 10.7 shots per 60, 11.6 individual scoring chances for per 60. Those are really good marks. The Corsi 4 per 60, scoring chances 4 per 60, still strong. He had an 11.4% shooting percentage. That's definitely lower than the last couple of years, 12.6%, 14.5%. 9.9% on ice shooting percentage, also lower versus 10.5% and 13.5% the 2 years prior. You got a lot of rising talent in Buffalo. I think that could be seen as a positive for some 5v5 line mate possibilities as well. I'm not saying you should go sell the farm for Jeff Skinner, but I do think that there's probably the manager in your league is pretty fed up with Jeff Skinner, and he could probably be had for a pretty low end prospect or something. Just something that gets people a little bit of excitement, and they're like, Jeff Skinner's not doing this for me. He's 32 years old. He's done. I don't think that's the case. I think Jeff Skinner's still got another bounce back left in him. I think he's going to provide some value production if you're a contending team this year. All right, last up, Josh. I don't think I need to sell you on this one, but John Tavares. Definitely gonna make this list for me. It was a disappointing season. 29 goals, 65 points, all over the Toronto media. Why are we playing this guy $11 million a year? He's an absolute bum. He's turning 34 before the start of next season. Talk to me about John Tavares and why we both love him so much.
Yeah, man. I mean, he just continues to do it under the hood.
Yeah.
He's not a flashy guy. He's not like the other top four players in Toronto, or core four players in Toronto, because he's not like a north south player. He's just really strong on the puck. Gets lots of pucks to the net. He's a battler in front of the goal on the power play. And yeah, last year was just a down year. I think that I mean, I was super high on him. Obviously, I was pretty outspoken about that, and I still think that there's juice left in the tank for John Tavares. Now, the last two seasons have been his absolute best in terms of shots per 60, individual scoring chances 4 per 60. And then on ice, his Corsi 4 per 60 and scoring chances 4 per 60. And I mean, I was outspoken about that the year before, so obviously I'm going to go all in on it this season. He had a 10.4% shooting percentage last year. That was the lowest of his career, which is crazy. I mean, it's not a terrible shooting percentage, but the previous 2 years he had 11.4 shooting percentage and a 13% shooting percentage. Is the 63% IPP was also the second lowest of his career, and then he had a 10.5 on ice shooting percentage, which is his lowest since joining the Leafs. There was only one other season below 12%. So I just feel, I mean, they spread the wealth a little bit at times through the year. His line mates kind of fluctuated. It wasn't as productive as the year before on the power play. I mean, as a unit, they weren't as productive as the year before on the power play. So I still think that there's something left for Tavares if he stays in Toronto. And I imagine out of the two players that are rumored to be moved, he's the most likely to stay and not waive his no move clause. So I'm still pretty high on the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I made this point with Blake on a pod with him earlier already, but it's really hard to imagine for me that Berube gives him less ice time this year. 1739 last year. Just it's not going to get less than that, in my opinion. So I think that Tavares is pretty safe at this floor and definitely still has ceiling for 35 goals, 75 points. I think that's well within the range of outcomes for John Tavares. So a decent bounce back, definitely something I'm banking on personally for my Maple Leafs for next year. I think that you can probably get him for pretty cheap at this point. A lot of people will start to think that at 34 years old, he's going to be cooked. So I don't think that. I think you can acquire him on a contending team and get a few years of production out of him yet. But that's all we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band They're There for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.